Hi, welcome to Chapter 4, The Principles of Design. My name is Professor Klotz, and I hope that you enjoy this lecture. As usual, please don't forget to take notes. So we begin with our learning objectives. Define the concepts of unity and variety in works of art, differentiate between symmetrical and asymmetrical design, describe how artists use emphasis and subordination to direct the attention of viewers, identify directional forces in work of art and explain how artists use them, discuss how artists use repetition and rhythm in their designs, and also explain how scale and proportion affect our interpretation of works of art. So the process of creation involves choosing which visual elements to use. As you may remember, we learned about the visual elements in Chapter 3. And the design principles are that process of organizing the visual elements and how they're organized. And so, again, design refers to the process of organizing visual elements and the product of that process. So the first design principle is unity and variety. Unity is the appearance of or condition of oneness. Variety provides diversity. It acts to counter unity. So you want to balance both unity and variety. And we see this within Jacob Lawrence's painting, Going Home, where he's established repeated and varied visual themes. So we have, for instance, if we take the visual element of color, we see he has used a variety of colors. However, he has also repeated some of the same colors, right? So like throughout, we see the red is repeated and the blue and the yellow, but yet he's got enough variety of color as well so that it balances the unity. So that this is a good example of balanced unity and variety. Now, balance is also achieved through symmetry or asymmetry. Symmetrical balance, the near or exact matching of left and right sides of a three-dimensional form or two-dimensional composition. We see this within the architect who designed the president's house. He created a symmetrical drawing. And so you see that the left and right side of the architecture of the White House matches. So this is an example of symmetrical architecture. Now, asymmetrical balance is when the left and right sides are not the same, and you have various elements that are used to balance. We see this in the painting of where Christ has risen from his tomb. And so we see an effortless quality in both paintings. This one is from Titian. And so again, you see Jesus, and I believe this is Mary Magdalene here, who has greeted him, and he has just risen from his tomb. But everything is balanced very, very well. So you see, for instance, the buildings in the upper right-hand corner are balancing the figures in the foreground. And then you have something also up in the sky with the large tree, this large form. So everything, again, even though it's an asymmetrical painting, it is balanced very well. Another painting that has asymmetrical balance, but is still has it actually has an extreme case of dynamic balancing, where the center of gravity is on the right, is Jockeys Before the Race. And so here we can see that we have this large form of the horse and rider on the right, but then our eye is led over here and then upward toward the sun. And so we're also going to look at emphasis and subordination. Now, emphasis is used to draw attention to an area. It's a specific spot or figure that could be a focal point. And so if we go back to Jockeys Before the Race, maybe the sun is a focal point, right? Now, there are various ways to create emphasis through position, contrast, which is the juxtaposition of strongly dissimilar elements, or color intensity, if there's a very bright color, and also size. So let's look at that and how it applies again to Jockeys Before the Race. So maybe just because this horse is the largest horse, that could be a focal point. Now, subordination are areas of lesser interest. They keep the viewer from being distracted. And we see this in Degas' Jockeys Before the Race. So maybe the sky would be an area of lesser interest, or the ground as well. Now, again, directional forces are paths for the eye to follow. That's another visual element that could be created by actual or implied lines. And again, we see an implied line happening with the horses, right? So we look at the large horse and the smaller horses kind of lead our eye to this vertical element here, and then upward toward the sun. And so there's a series of focal points, diagonal directional forces as well within Degas' painting. Degas, I want to mention, was an Impressionist painter. So Impressionism emerged in France, and it was founded by Claude Monet. And so these artists were interested in capturing the fleeting effects of light and color on the outdoor landscape and trying to create an impression of the landscape. So repetition and rhythm is another design principle, and repetition refers to the regular reoccurrence of visual elements. Now, pattern is when there's an all-over design created by the repetitive ordering of elements. And you see this often in textiles. And rhythm, the simplest way to create rhythm is by repetition. Now, this painting here titled Cranes, and actually it's ink. So it has both repetition and rhythm. And so we have a simplified repeated pattern of birds. And then scale and proportion is another visual element, and scale is the size relation of one thing to another, how big the artwork will be. Proportion is the size relationship of parts to a whole. And what's interesting is that in the next picture, we're going to see that these inner circles are the same size, but they appear differently depending on the surrounding circle size. So because this circle is smaller and it's surrounded by the large circles, it makes it look smaller, the center circle, than this one here. And again, they are the same size, but because of the smaller circles that are around this one, this circle just happens to appear larger. So format refers to a size and shape of a two-dimensional picture plane. Change in proportion can make a difference in the viewer's experience of a subject. In two Pietas, where we see a depiction of Mary holding and mourning over the body of Jesus, we see that the artist has altered proportion. And so in the Michelangelo Pieta, we have the grown Jesus on his mother's lap. And then in the Rothkin Pieta, we see proportions are distorted to heighten the expressiveness of the work. And Christ's body expresses the suffering in a way. This one expresses suffering here on the right in the way that Michelangelo's avoided. So the artist here has altered proportion, but he's doing that intentionally again. And then on this other one, we see the way that Michelangelo has altered the proportion of his marble Pieta sculpture is that if Mary were to stand, I believe she would be over 8 or 9 feet tall, but he did that so that Jesus could fit in her lap. And so again, these are two examples of how scale and proportion have been altered by the artist and for different reasons. So this concludes the chapter 4 lecture on the principles of design. I hope that you've enjoyed the lecture. Thank you for listening.